In 59 BC, Julius Caesar was not the titan of history we know. He was a 40-year-old politician, a brilliant orator, and a charismatic leader of the Populares faction. He was also, by every account, spectacularly, dangerously bankrupt. His entire political career had been funded by borrowed money. His creditors, including the wealthiest man in Rome, Marcus Crassus, owned him. His political enemies in the Senate, the conservative optimates led by Cato the Younger, were waiting. They watched him finish his term as consul, sharpening their knives, preparing the lawsuits and charges of bribery that would end his career and send him into a disgraced exile. Caesar was trapped. He needed to escape Rome. He needed immunity from prosecution. He needed gloria, military glory, to rival his new ally, Pompey the Great. And most of all, he needed money. He needed a river of gold to drown his debts and buy his way to absolute power. His solution was a political masterstroke. Using his leverage in the first triumvirate, his secret alliance with Pompey and Crassus, he secured for himself an unprecedented 5-year command as proconsul, not of a wealthy, civilized province, but of a relative backwater, Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and crucially, a small settled strip of Transalpine Gaul. To his enemies, it was a governmentship. To Caesar, it was a license to engineer a war, to raise an army, and to seize a fortune. The next 8 years would not be a defense of Rome, as he would later claim. They would be the largest, most brutal, and most brilliant leveraged buyout in history. This is the story of how Julius Caesar, the bankrupt politician, used the Gallic Wars to conquer Rome itself. Caesar arrived in Gaul in 58 BC with 4 legions. His mandate was to defend Roman territory. But a defensive governor does not become a legend. Caesar needed a casus belli, a reason for war, and if one did not exist, he would invent it. Fortune immediately provided him with a pretext. The Helvetii, a massive confederation of Celtic tribes, had decided to migrate from their homes in modern-day Switzerland to a new land on the Atlantic coast. Their path would take them near the borders of Roman Transalpine Gaul. To Caesar, this was not a refugee crisis. It was an opportunity. He immediately began writing his dispatches to the Senate, which would later be compiled into his masterpiece of propaganda, De Bello Gallico, the Gallic Wars, framed this migration as a mortal threat. He claimed, with dubious figures, that 368,000 barbarians were on the move, ready to destabilize all of Gaul and threaten Rome itself. He raised 2 new legions without Senate approval, and when the Helvetii asked for peaceful passage, he refused. He built fortifications to block them. He forced them into a different path, one that led them directly into the territory of Rome's allies, the Aedui. When the Aedui, as he knew they would, pleaded for Roman intervention, Caesar had his justification. He was no longer an aggressor, he was a protector. He marched his legions outside of his provincial boundaries, an illegal act, and hunted the Helvetii down. He shattered their migrating column at the Battle of Bibracte. He forced the survivors, whom he claimed numbered only 110,000, back to their ruined homes. His first entry in the ledger of war was a resounding success. He had saved Gaul. But one victory was not enough. A returning general was a general who could be prosecuted. He needed to chain his conflicts. No sooner had the Helvetii been dealt with than another threat emerged. The Gallic tribes, now gathered to congratulate him, secretly expressed their concern over Ariovistus, a German king who had crossed the Rhine and settled in their lands. This was a complex political problem. Ariovistus was in fact an ally. The Roman Senate had officially named him Friend of the Roman People only a year earlier, during Caesar's own consulship. It made no difference. Caesar declared Ariovistus a new threat to Roman interests. He sent the German king an ultimatum, demanding he withdraw his people. When Ariovistus, confused, replied that he was a friend of Rome and had been invited into Gaul, Caesar declared his terms insulting. He marched his legions to face the Germans at the Battle of the Vosges. When his own troops wavered, terrified of the savage Germans, Caesar delivered a speech of pure political genius. He shamed them, declaring he would march on with only his loyal 10th Legion if he had to. The entire army, their pride stung, begged to be led into battle. He crushed Ariovistus and drove the Germans back across the Rhine. In a single campaign season, Caesar had, through sheer force of will, appointed himself the arbiter of all Gaul. He had defeated the migratory Celts and the invading Germans. He was no longer a governor, he was a conqueror. And he would spend the winter raising more legions, his eyes already turning north.
In 57 BC, Caesar turned his attention to the Belgae, a collection of powerful tribes in the north. His justification? He had heard reports that they were forming a confederacy against him. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were arming themselves precisely because Caesar had illegally marched an army to their border. This campaign was not about defense, it was about systematic conquest. And it was here that Caesar first demonstrated the two qualities that defined his command: terrifying speed and ruthless brutality. He marched his army so fast that he caught the Belgic tribes unprepared. He defeated them one by one. But one tribe, the Nervii, did not break. At the Battle of the Sabes, the Nervii launched a perfectly concealed ambush, catching the Roman legions as they were still making camp. The attack was so sudden, so violent, that the Roman line shattered. Legionaries were cut down before they could even put on their helmets. This was the moment that forged the bond between Caesar and his men. He did not command from the rear. He grabbed a shield from a retreating soldier, plunged into the front rank, and fought hand to hand with his men, screaming at his centurions to hold the line. Inspired by his personal courage, the legions reformed and, with the timely arrival of the 10th Legion, annihilated the Nervii. Caesar, in his Commentaries, claims that of 60,000 Nervian warriors, only 500 survived. He portrayed it as a tragic defensive struggle, a fight for survival. The Senate in Rome, reading his dispatch, was horrified and impressed. They had no choice but to grant him an unprecedented 15-day supplicatio, or public thanksgiving. Caesar had used his own propaganda to turn an illegal war of aggression into a celebrated defense of Roman honor. But back in Rome, his political foundation was cracking. His allies, Pompey and Crassus, were growing wary of his newfound fame. His enemies were calling for his recall. In 56 BC, Caesar left his army and traveled to the Conference of Lucca. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering. From his position as a field commander, he summoned the two most powerful men in Rome to him. There, they renewed their triumvirate. Crassus would get a command in Syria, where he would famously die. Pompey would get Spain. And Caesar? Caesar received the one thing he needed, an extension. His command in Gaul was renewed for another 5 years. The conquest was now a 10-year project. With his political future secure, Caesar embarked on a series of campaigns designed not for military necessity, but for public relations. He was now performing for the audience back in Rome. In 55 BC, he bridged the Rhine. German tribes had been raiding Gaul, so Caesar decided on a show of force. But he would not simply ferry his troops across. He would tame the river. In just 10 days, his engineers built a massive wooden bridge across the Rhine, a feat of engineering that stunned the German tribes. He marched his legions across, burned a few villages, and marched back, dismantling the bridge behind him. He had proven that no barbarian, not even a river god, could stop a Roman army. But this was merely the prelude. That same year, he turned his sights on the most mythic land of all, Britannia. The island of Britain was to the Romans what the moon was to the 20th century. It was a land of myth, shrouded in mist at the literal end of the world. No Roman army had ever dared to go there. Caesar's invasion was a logistical nightmare. The weather was terrible. The tides were treacherous. His cavalry failed to land. Militarily, the expedition was a failure. He fought a few skirmishes, took some hostages, and left. He returned the next year with a larger force, which was also a logistical mess. But it didn't matter. The commentaries detailing these expeditions were bestsellers in Rome. The average citizen was electrified. Caesar had not just defeated Gauls, he had crossed the ocean, he had tamed the Rhine. He was waging war against nature itself. He was no longer just a general, he was a legend. He was putting his personal brand on the very edges of the known world. Caesar's propaganda was working. He was the hero of Rome, a living legend. But his brutality and arrogance in Gaul had planted the seeds of a disaster that would threaten to destroy everything he had built. If you are enjoying this analysis of strategy, politics, and propaganda, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon. We release deep-dive historical analyses just like this one, exploring the real stories behind the greatest conflicts in history.
But Caesar's arrogance had a price. While he was performing his PR stunts in Britain, the situation in Gaul was deteriorating. He had broken the tribes, but he had not won their hearts. He had only instilled in them a burning hatred. The winter of 54 BC was the breaking point. A bad harvest led to food shortages. Caesar, spreading his legions thin to forage, made a fatal miscalculation. A Cantic chieftain, Ambiorix of the Eburones, saw his chance. He launched a surprise attack, ambushing and annihilating an entire Roman legion, over 6,000 men under the command of Sabinus and Cotta. It was a catastrophe, the single greatest Roman defeat of the war. When the news reached Caesar, his reaction was not that of a politician. It was cold, personal, and terrifying. He swore an oath not to cut his hair or his beard until he had exacted his revenge. For the next year, he did not wage war. He conducted a systematic campaign of genocide. He put a price on the head of every Eburones man, woman, and child. He invited tribes from across the Rhine to come and take what they wanted from Eburones' lands. His own commentaries describe a land of total terror, where he burned every village and killed every living thing he could find, all in an attempt to hunt one man, Ambiorix, who was never caught. Caesar's legions were now bound to him by something stronger than pay. They were bound by shared disaster and by shared savagery. Caesar's brutality had a terrifying unintended consequence. For the first time in their history, the disparate warring tribes of Gaul found a single cause: their mutual hatred of Rome. And in 52 BC, they found a single leader, Vercingetorix, chieftain of the Arverni. He was young, charismatic, and he understood something no Gallic leader had before. They could not defeat Caesar in a pitched battle. Roman discipline and engineering were too strong. Vercingetorix implemented a new, brutal strategy, terra addusta, the scorched earth. He ordered the Gauls to burn their own towns, their own farms, their own grain stores. They would deny Caesar's army food and forage and bleed him dry. The Great Revolt had begun. Caesar, who was in Italy,
raced back across the Alps in the dead of winter, moving with his trademark speed to find his legions scattered and all of Gaul in flames. The campaign of 52 BC was a desperate chase. Vercingetorix's strategy was working. Caesar's legions were starving. After a humiliating defeat at Gergovia, a battle Caesar conspicuously glosses over in his writings, he was forced to retreat. Vercingetorix believed Caesar was broken. He decided, in a rare miscalculation, to shadow the Roman retreat. Caesar, sensing the trap, wheeled his army and attacked. The Gauls were repulsed and Vercingetorix made his final, fatal decision. He retreated with his 80,000 warriors into the Oppidum, the hilltop fortress of Alesia. He believed it was an impregnable position. He would wait for his massive relief army to arrive, and they would crush Caesar between the fortress and the reinforcing horde. He had just trapped himself. Caesar arrived at Alesia and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. This was the endgame. All of his enemies were in one place. He would not just attack Alesia. He would entomb it. He ordered his men to build the most incredible field fortification in military history. First, his engineers built the wall of circumvallation. This was an 18-kilometer, 4-meter-high wall complete with towers, ditches, and traps, facing inward to pin Vercingetorix and his 80,000 men inside. But Caesar knew the Gallic relief army was coming, so he ordered his exhausted legions to build a second wall, the Wall of Contravallation. This was a 21-kilometer wall facing outward to protect his own army from the reinforcing Gauls. He had built a fortress to besiege a fortress. His 50,000 men were now trapped between Vercingetorix's 80,000 in the city and a relief army of, by Caesar's own count, over 250,000. This was it. This was not just a battle for Gaul. This was a battle for Caesar's life. If he lost here, he would not make it back to Rome. He would be slaughtered in a field in central France. His men, starved and exhausted, dug, their loyalty to their general absolute. Inside Alesia, starvation set in. Vercingetorix, in a desperate move, expelled all the women, children, and elderly from the city, hoping Caesar would let them pass. Caesar did not. He refused them passage. For days, thousands of Gallic civilians starved to death in the no-man's land between the city wall and the Roman line, their cries echoing in the ears of both armies. It was an act of calculated, inhuman cruelty. Finally, the massive Gallic relief army arrived. The final battle began. The Romans were attacked from both sides simultaneously. The relief army smashed against the outer wall, while Vercingetorix launched a desperate charge against the inner wall. The chaos was total. The Roman line nearly broke, but Caesar was everywhere, his famous red cloak a beacon in the dust, rallying his men, plugging gaps, leading a cavalry charge himself. His men, seeing him, fought with the strength of madmen. They held. The Gallic relief army, disorganized and poorly led, shattered and fled. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched his last hope dissolve. The next day, he rode out of the fortress, clad in his finest armor, and formally surrendered, throwing his weapons at Caesar's feet. Gaul was broken.
The war was over. Caesar spent the next 2 years stamping out the last embers of resistance. He had done what no Roman had ever dreamed of. He had conquered all of Gaul, from the Pyrenees to the English Channel. But what were the real spoils of war? It was not land. Rome gained a new province, but it was a graveyard. Caesar himself claimed 1 million Gauls were dead and another million enslaved. The true spoils were for Caesar alone. First, money. He had plundered the temples and treasuries of an entire continent. The influx of Gallic gold was so vast that when it reached Rome, the price of gold itself crashed. Caesar paid off his debts. He paid off Crassus's debts. And he had enough left over to bribe, buy, or build anything he wanted. Second, and more importantly, the army. He no longer commanded 4 legions. He had 10. These were not the conscript legions of old. They were his personal, professional, veteran army. They had fought with him, starved with him, and bled with him for 8 years. Their loyalty was not to the Senate and people of Rome. Their loyalty was to Caesar, the general who paid them, who knew their names, and who had led them to impossible victories. In 50 BC, Caesar's enemies in the Senate, now led by his former ally Pompey, finally made their move. Crassus was dead. The triumvirate was broken. They issued an ultimatum. Caesar was to lay down his command, disband his army, and return to Rome as a privatus, a private citizen, to face the charges against him. It was the checkmate they had been planning for a decade. Caesar stood with his loyal 13th Legion on the banks of a small river, the Rubicon. This river marked the sacred boundary of Italy. To cross it with an army was an act of treason, an act of war. His enemies had miscalculated. They thought they were cornering a bankrupt politician. But the man on the other side of that river was not a politician, not anymore. He was the wealthiest man in the world. He was the most beloved living legend in Rome. And he was the commander of the most terrifying army on earth, an army forged in the crucible of Gaul. The Gallic Wars were never about Gaul. They were about the creation of this man and this army. They were the 8-year-long, blood-soaked prelude to his real goal. Looking across the water towards Rome, Caesar uttered his famous words, "Alea iacta est." He gave the order. The legion marched. The civil war had begun, and the Roman Republic was already dead. It had died not on the fields of Italy, but in the dark forests of Gaul, at the hands of the very man who claimed to be its champion. So was Caesar a brilliant hero who brought civilization to Gaul, or a ruthless butcher who destroyed a republic for his own ambition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching.